My family summoned me to a $4,000 feast of lobster and wagyu, and then they handed me the check before I'd even touched my water glass. My name is Elena. I'm 33, and I oversee the operations for a hospitality group that pushes over 2,000 meals across 5 different venues every single week. I know the exact path a receipt travels from a server's apron to a guest's hand the way most people know how to tie their laces. It's a reflex, a second-nature instinct. So when my mother and father, who hadn't spoken a word to me in 36 months, called out of the blue to say they wanted a reconciliation dinner, I had one critical question that I neglected to ask before I agreed to go. Who else was going to be seated at that table? I didn't ask. I drove 45 minutes across town to the Vanguard, a high-end spot known for its coastal cuisine. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and found myself staring at 19 members of my extended family, already seated around a sprawling table laden with lobster thermidor filet mignon sliders, and a vintage Cabernet that cost more than my first car, a bottle they'd already nearly finished by the time I'd found a parking spot. My father looked up from the head of the table. He smiled, a familiar, commanding expression I'd seen 1,000 times, and delivered the line I'd spent my entire adult life training myself to resist. "You're covering the bill, right? After all, you owe us that." He was so sure he had me trapped. He hadn't predicted the 2 simple sentences I was about to pass to our waiter, or the shocking truth his own credit card was about to reveal to the entire party just 15 minutes later. Welcome to Mind Unveiled, where we explore the stories of ordinary people facing impossible family dilemmas and walking away with their dignity intact. If you have ever been the one expected to pay, to fix, or to stay quiet for the sake of peace, this story is for you. I want you to drop a comment and hit that subscribe button, but let's back up a few weeks before that disastrous dinner. Before the parking lot filled with the cars I recognized, before my father attempted to hand me a receipt the size of a small loan, I need to show you who I was the morning that invitation arrived. Because that version of me, the one they were betting on, was a version I had already buried. I didn't own the restaurants I managed. I ran them. I clawed my way up from clearing plates at a family steakhouse in Nashville when I was just 16. I still remember the smell of fryer oil clinging to my jacket on the school bus the next morning. I was a hostess by 18, a server by 20, a floor manager by 25, and finally, the regional director of operations by 31. I am not wealthy. I have a modest condo that's paid off, a 401k I don't touch, and exactly one personal luxury, a glass of sparkling water with a twist of lime. That's what I order every single time I eat out. My colleagues think it's a little eccentric. It's not. When you grow up being the one who covers everyone else's prime rib, you learn to keep your own tab so small that you can walk away from it without a backward glance. That morning, I was in my office, buried in a spreadsheet for a new seafood supplier. The kind of mundane Tuesday that makes you forget that not everyone's life runs on inventory lists and labor costs. My phone vibrated. I glanced over and felt an iciness settle deep in my chest. 3 years of absolute radio silence. And there it was, a notification from the group chat I'd been exiled from the very day I became the family's scapegoat. Family had added me back. I stared at that notification for a long, aching minute before I dared to open it. Family, the little blue flower emoji my mother had chosen 5 years ago, back when the group was used for sharing holiday recipes and photos of my sister's golden retriever. I hadn't seen that flower in 3 years. The chat log was eerily clean. Nothing above my mother's latest message, which likely meant they'd either erased the history or, more tellingly, that they'd had a separate active group without me all this time. My mom's text was warm, polished, almost scripted. She wrote that she and Dad had been doing a lot of thinking and wanted to invite me to a dinner at the Vanguard to begin healing as a family. Just the 4 of us, she promised. Her, Dad, me, and my sister Chloe. A small dinner, A fresh start. Then, a second message flashed down 30 seconds later, containing the line that should have been the first red flag. Family takes care of family, sweetheart. It's time we remembered that. Family takes care of family. She used to say that when I was 18, and she needed my waitressing tips to cover the utility bill. She said it when I was 22, and my dad needed a cosigner on a new pickup truck. She said it when Chloe's first security deposit fell through. And I quietly wired her the money without a second thought. Family takes care of family had always meant one thing in my household. Elena takes care of the family. I read the message twice. I noticed the crucial omission. My mother hadn't apologized. She hadn't admitted she was wrong. She had said it was time to heal. The wording was passive, a non-apology, no one taking responsibility. I typed back a simple, "I'll be there." Then I placed my phone face down on my desk and tried to refocus on the seafood contract, pretending my hands weren't shaking. 3 years ago, my younger sister Chloe decided she was going to open a juice bar. No business plan, no market analysis. A juice bar because she'd seen one in Miami with a gorgeous white marble counter and a turmeric latte menu and thought, I could do that. She was 25, had never managed a single shift in her life, and she needed $60,000 for a small business loan. The bank said yes, but only with a cosigner. That cosigner was supposed to be me. My mother called on a Sunday. My father sat beside her, arms folded, his jaw already tight with anger before I'd even answered the phone. Chloe needed this loan. The juice bar was her dream. I had a solid credit score, a steady job, and a long history of saying yes. Just sign the papers, Elena, she'd said. I asked to see the business plan first. Chloe didn't have one. I asked about her projected profit margins, her lease conditions, her supplier contracts. Chloe just stared at me, eyes wide, like I had just insulted her very soul. My mom's voice went cold, a tone I knew all too well. She's your sister. You don't need a spreadsheet to love your sister. I said no, not because I didn't love Chloe. I did. But I had spent enough years in this industry watching people with stars in their eyes pour their savings into doomed concepts. I knew what $60,000 of someone else's debt looks like at 2 a.m. when the juice bar is closed, the kale is wilting, and the loan payment is still due. My father stood up. He pointed toward the front door and said the words that sealed the deal for 3 years. If you won't help this family, you're not part of it. I drove home. The next morning, I had been removed from the family chat. No one called. No one texted. For 3 years, I was the daughter who cared more about money than she did about her own sister. Now, here's the part that's hardest to admit. The silence didn't just sting, it nearly shattered me. Not because I thought they were right. I knew they weren't. It hurt because I missed being needed. That was the real wound. The one I carried for 2 years until I found a therapist, Dr. Miller, who helped me name it properly. I had been the family's sole safety net since I was a teenager. My first real paycheck went to groceries. My tax refund went to my mom's root canal. When my dad's transmission blew up, I paid for the entire rebuild and lied to him, telling him it was covered by an extended warranty, because I knew he'd never accept a handout from his 22-year-old daughter. When Chloe got married, I was the one who covered the flowers, the wedding photographer, and half the reception. I smiled through all of it while my mother made a toast about raising 2 strong, independent girls. 2 strong girls. 1 invisible bill. I didn't do it because I was just so generous. I did it because somewhere around the age of 14, I figured out that the quickest way to keep the peace in my family was to make sure no one ever had to ask twice. Ask once, Elena pays, the problem goes away, and dinner is quiet. I trained them. I conditioned my own parents into believing that my wallet was a kind of vending machine. Insert a little guilt, and money comes out. And when that machine finally displayed out of order, they didn't try to fix it. They unplugged it. They walked away and left me in the dark. So, when my mother's message popped up after 3 years, family takes care of family, sweetheart, I felt that old reflex fire in my chest like a muscle I hadn't used in years. Go fix it. Pay whatever it costs. Make it quiet. But I also heard Dr. Miller's voice, a steady counterpoint. You taught them you would always pay. That was your mistake to fix. And the way to fix it wasn't by paying more. It was by stopping. My coworker Sarah told me not to go. She sat across from me at lunch the day after the invitation holding her coffee and said, Elena, this has ambush written all over it. It's a trap. I remember laughing because Sarah had never even met my family, and yet she could see the danger more clearly than I could. My sous chef Marco said the same thing. Boss, don't do it. This is a setup. But I had already made up my mind. Not because I believed them. Not because I was expecting an apology. I wanted to look my parents in the eye and see if 3 years had changed anything. Or if the silence had just been a longer, crueler version of the same conversation we'd always had. The conversation where I was meant to listen, nod, and pay. I wanted closure. Even if closure just meant confirming that the door was permanently sealed. There was something else too, something I'm going to be honest about, because I think many of you will understand this. I missed my mother. Not the mother who orchestrated the traps and kept the score. The mother who taught me to make biscuits in a cast iron skillet when I was 8, humming along to the radio while the butter melted. That mother hadn't called in 3 years either, but some nights I could still hear her humming. So, I told Sarah I was going. I told Marco I'd be fine. I told myself the same thing, and I almost believed it. I set one simple rule. 1 dinner, civil, no money. If it felt wrong, I would leave before they even brought out the dessert. I wrote that rule on a sticky note and pressed it to my steering wheel the morning of the dinner. That little yellow square was still there when I pulled into the Vanguard's parking lot and started counting the cars. I dressed plainly on purpose. Black pants, a simple white blouse I usually wear to vendor meetings, sensible flats. No expensive jewelry except for the small silver watch I bought myself the day I was promoted to regional director. Not to impress anyone, but because I had earned it. It kept good time, and that felt like enough. I didn't want to walk into the Vanguard looking like I was playing a part. My family already thought I flaunted my success. The reality was that I drove a beat-up sedan and meal prepped on Sundays like everyone else. The drive took 45 minutes. I drove in silence. No music. My hands stayed at 10 and 2. Somewhere around the highway on ramp. My stomach started to clench in that familiar way. The same feeling I get when the walk-in cooler breaks on a Friday night, and I know the next 6 hours are going to be a nightmare. Instinct. My body knew something my brain was still trying to process. I almost turned around at the exit. I almost did. But I thought about that cast iron skillet, and I thought about Dr. Miller's voice, and I kept driving. The Vanguard was at the end of a row of boutique shops I hadn't visited in years. The wealthy side of town, the kind of place where the valets are dressed in vests and the front doors are made of solid mahogany. My dad's truck was in the 3rd row. My mom's sedan was right next to it. Fine. Then I saw my Aunt Carol's minivan, my Uncle Steve's Jeep, Chloe's compact car with the faded decal from the juice bar that had shuttered its doors just 11 months after opening. 3 more cars I recognized. 2, I didn't. My stomach plummeted before I even turned off the ignition. Just the 4 of us my mom had written. I counted at least 10 vehicles. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes, engine off, hands gripping the wheel, staring at that sticky note. 1 dinner, then home. The smart play would have been to reverse out of the lot and drive the 45 minutes back to my condo, eat some leftover soup, and forget the whole thing. Forget the Mayfield family reunion I hadn't been invited to. Or, more accurately, that I had been invited to without ever being told the full guest list. But I got out of the car. I straightened my blouse. I locked the door and walked toward the entrance, because I was 33 years old, and I had spent the last 3 years learning how to stop running. I was not about to start running again in a restaurant parking lot on a Thursday evening. The front doors were solid and heavy, the kind that whisper, "Entrees start at $60 here." Inside, the lobby smelled like truffle oil, warm sourdough, and money. A hostess in an all-black dress gave me a practiced smile and checked her screen. "Mayfield," I said. She nodded. "Your party is already seated," she said, with that specific inflection hostesses use when they've been dealing with a large, rambunctious group for over an hour and are trying very, very hard not to look frazzled. I recognized that expression. I'd worn it myself 1,000 times. She grabbed a single menu and led me toward the private dining room in the back. I could hear them before I could see them. Laughter, the clink of expensive glassware. My Aunt Carol's unmistakable cackle, sharp and loud, cutting through the refined murmur of the main dining room. One dinner, then home. I turned the corner and saw the table. 19 chairs. Every single one filled except for one at the very end, directly across from my father. The table was a massive stretch of white linen, heavy silver, and candles in low, sparkling crystal holders. Platters were everywhere, lobster tails artfully fanned across crushed ice, miniature wagyu burgers stacked on a tiered stand, a charcuterie board the size of a coffee table, and in the center, a bottle of wine I recognized from our supplier tasting sheets. A 2015 Screaming Eagle Cabernet. Retail price? At least $500. And it was already half empty. They'd been here for a while. They'd been ordering the most expensive items on the menu. The hostess paused at the edge of the alcove and looked at me with an expression that needed no translation. "Good luck." She leaned in a little and whispered, "Your father put a card on file to reserve the table. Just so you know, it's our policy for groups over 10. I logged that information the way I log every operational detail. Silently, permanently, completely, his card was on file. He'd secured the table. And yet somehow, I already knew the bill wasn't supposed to land on him. My mother saw me first. She shot up from her seat, arms open wide like a stage actor embracing the spotlight. "Elena." "Oh, honey. Look at you." Applause, actual, genuine applause from the table, like I was a returning war hero and not the daughter they'd ghosted for 1,000 days. Uncle Steve let out a low whistle. Aunt Carol dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. Chloe raised her wine glass, offering a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. 19 people, lobster and wagyu and a $500 bottle of wine. Just the 4 of us, my mother had written. I sat down. What else do you do when 19 people are staring at you? Your chair is already pulled out, and a waiter is pouring water into your glass before your purse has even hit the floor. I sat down and smiled, because that's what 15 years of front-of-house training gives you, the ability to smile while your brain is running a full-throttle threat assessment. My mother settled back into her seat, beaming. We wanted it to be a surprise. The whole family back together. Just like old times. I thought it was just the 4 of us, I said, keeping my voice neutral. My mother waved her hand dismissively. Well, once Carol heard, and then Steve, and then your cousin Tara, it just sort of snowballed. You know how family is. I knew exactly how family was. I scanned the table. My father sat at the head, slicing into a wagyu slider like it was a Thanksgiving turkey. Chloe sat to his left, phone in one hand, wineglass in the other, scrolling. Aunt Carol and Uncle Steve anchored the middle. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in half a decade filled the rest. Tyler, Megan, Jake, a couple of wives I'd met once, and Aunt Carol's neighbor, a man I'd never seen before in my life, who was currently enjoying a free lobster dinner. The wine was flowing, the platters were decimated. They'd been here for at least an hour before I arrived, and they'd ordered nearly everything on the menu that didn't require a second mortgage. My mom leaned across the table and squeezed my hand. See? Family takes care of family. There it was again. The same 5 words, wrapped in the same warm tone, aimed at the same target. I squeezed her hand back and said nothing. I was counting plates. My father was the kind of man who didn't ask the table for their order, he commanded it. He waved the waiter over, a young kid barely out of college who looked like he was running on caffeine and anxiety. He rattled off more additions to the order, not even glancing at the menu. Another round of the lobster tails, 2 more of those wagyu plates, and bring another bottle of that Screaming Eagle. The good vintage, you know. The good one, loud enough for the tables on either side of us to hear. My dad pulled his credit card from his wallet, holding it up between 2 fingers like a magician revealing a coin before the trick. Put it all on this, he told the waiter, gesturing to the card. We're celebrating tonight. The waiter, whose name tag read Ethan, scribbled on his notepad and nodded, disappearing toward the kitchen with the look of a young man who desperately needed a break. I watched my father tuck the card back into his wallet with a satisfied little pat, the way you pat a dog that's performed a trick. Something was off. I had grown up watching my dad argue over the price of a muffler. I had seen him return a single shirt because the sale tag was missing. Robert Mayfield did not order $500 bottles of wine. He did not wave credit cards around like flags. This was a performance, and it was aimed at me. It said, "Look how well we're doing, Elena. Look how little we've needed you." Except, the truck in the parking lot was the same rusting beater from 5 years ago, with a dent in the side panel he'd never fixed. And my mom's purse, the worn leather bag she'd carried since I was in high school, sat on the seat beside her, its strap held together by a safety pin. They were performing. I just didn't know the ticket price yet. The small, barbed comments started around the second bottle of wine. My Aunt Carol leaned across Uncle Steve and said, "It must be so nice running all those fancy restaurants while the rest of us are clipping coupons." She laughed when she said it, that specific biting laugh people use when they want you to know they're absolutely serious. My cousin Megan asked if I ever felt guilty living so well while her own parents were going through such a rough patch. I didn't know about a rough patch. No one had told me about any rough patch. Chloe, not looking up from her phone, added, "She wouldn't know. She's been gone." Each comment landed with the precise, cruel timing of something rehearsed. They'd been talking about me, about my absence, my money, my life. They'd arrived with a shared story. Elena left. Elena has money. Elena owes. Aunt Carol delivered the final statement. She reached across the table, taking my hand as if she were comforting a widow at a funeral. "Family doesn't keep score, dear," she said. I almost laughed out loud. Family doesn't keep score? This from a woman who hadn't spoken to her own son for 8 months because he sat on the wrong side of the table at a Thanksgiving dinner. I didn't laugh. I gently pulled my hand back and reached for my glass. Sparkling water. The only thing in front of me. The only thing I'd ordered. The contrast was almost comical. 19 people drenched in wine and lobster, and me with a humble glass of sparkling water sitting at the end of the table like a designated driver at a bachelor party. Ethan, the young waiter, passed behind me, and I caught his eye. "Just the water tonight?" he asked, very quietly. "Just the water," I said. He nodded, a small, knowing gesture, like he understood something I hadn't said aloud. "Let me tell you about Ethan. He was barely 21, built thin the way most restaurant kids are before they learn to eat between the chaotic dinner rushes. He moved fast but deliberately, the way new servers do when the table is too large and the order too complex, and they're terrified of making a mistake. I recognized him completely because I had been him. 17 years old, 3 tables deep, learning that the guests who snap their fingers are always the ones who tip the worst. He was handling our 19 top all on his own. A busboy occasionally appeared to clear plates, but Ethan was running every single order, every refill, every "excuse me, can we get more butter?" from Aunt Carol, who'd asked him 3 times in 20 minutes. He never complained. He never sighed. He refilled my sparkling water without being asked, and when he set the glass down again, he caught me staring at the table with an expression I probably should have hidden. "Long night," he murmured, a note of commiseration in his voice. I almost told him the truth. Instead, I just said, "You're doing great." He blinked, surprised, as if he had forgotten that customers could say things like that. Then he straightened up a little, visibly relieved, and moved on to Uncle Steve's refill. I watched him go and thought about the version of me who used to carry 4 plates up her forearm and cry in the walk-in freezer on the hard nights. That girl had no idea she'd end up on the other side of a table like this, but she would have understood exactly what I was about to do. I excused myself to the restroom about 40 minutes in. I needed a few minutes without Aunt Carol's commentary and a door I could lock. The Vanguard's restroom was the kind with cloth hand towels, expensive lavender soap, and a full-length mirror that made you look slightly better than you felt. A neat trick, considering I felt like I was digesting shards of glass. I turned on the faucet and pressed cold water against my wrists, the way you do when you need your heart rate to cooperate with your brain. Then I saw it. A phone on the edge of the marble countertop, screen still glowing, case covered in tiny daisy stickers. Chloe's phone. She must have come in before me and left it behind. Chloe left things everywhere. It was one of the few traits we shared. I didn't plan to look. I want to be clear about that. But the screen was bright, and a notification banner was at the very top from a group chat I'd never been added to. The group was called The Dinner Plan. 3 members, Mom, Dad, and Chloe. The latest message, sent 4 days ago, was from my mother. The preview showed the words I can still recite from memory. "Don't tell Elena it's everyone. She'll freeze up if she knows the whole family is coming." The message cut off at the banner's edge. My pulse was steady. My hands were dry. I picked up the phone the way I'd pick up a vendor invoice that didn't add up. Not angry, not shocked, just confirming what the numbers had already told me. I scrolled up. The full message read, "Don't tell Elena it's everyone. Once she's there with everyone watching, she won't dare say no." She never could handle a scene. Below it, my dad had replied, "Just make sure she sits at my end. I'll handle the ask." And Chloe's contribution, time-stamped 2 minutes later, was, "Order the good stuff before she gets there. Once it's on the table, she can't exactly send it back." Lol, I kept scrolling. 3 weeks of messages, my mother coordinating the RSVPs. Carol's in. Steve's in. Megan says yes if there's good wine. My father handling the logistics. Parking, the reservation time. How to phrase the invitation so it sounded casual. Then, the messages that chilled me to the bone. My mother, 10 days ago, the bank called again. "We need to figure something out before June. My father, Elena, can cover us through the spring. She's got more than enough." And the most damning one of all, my mother, 8 days ago, "It's not asking for money. It's letting her back into the family. She should be grateful we're even giving her this chance." Grateful. They wanted me to be grateful for the privilege of being tricked into a dinner so I could pay the bill they had racked up, for a family that had cut me off when I said no the last time. I set Chloe's phone back on the counter, screen down, exactly where I had found it. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in that mirror, and I thought, I know exactly what you're all doing. I know what this costs. And for the first time in 15 years, I decided I was not going to pay it. I stood in that bathroom, holding the truth in both hands. The strangest part was how calm I felt. Not numb, not angry, just clear. The way a kitchen goes silent right before the dinner rush begins. Everything in its place. Nothing wasted. Every station ready. If you have ever found out that you were loved for what you could provide and not for who you are, then you know exactly how cold that tile floor felt under my shoes. Stay with me. Subscribe, because what I did next, I planned in the time it takes to dry your hands. I walked back to the table with the same expression I wear when a health inspector arrives unannounced. Pleasant, unreadable, fully operational. No one noticed anything different. Aunt Carol was telling a story about her neighbor's contentious divorce. Uncle Steve was working on his third lobster tail. Chloe had already retrieved her phone and was scrolling again, completely oblivious. But I noticed things now that I hadn't before. My mother kept glancing at my dad's wallet on the table, quick, nervous little flicks of her eyes. My father's laugh was a half beat too loud, the way people laugh when they're covering their anxiety. The wine bottle, the second one, was nearly gone, and no one was suggesting they slow down. Why would they? They weren't paying. I was paying. That was the entire point of the evening. Every lobster tail, every wagyu slider, every sip of that expensive Cabernet was another brick in the wall they were building around me. It was high enough that I couldn't climb out without making a scene. The one thing I had spent my entire life avoiding. I started asking questions. Casual ones, the kind you ask when you're trying to catch up after 3 years, not the kind you ask when you already know the answers and are watching people lie. How's the juice bar, Chloe? Chloe's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Oh, we closed down. The market just wasn't there. She said it fast, like pulling off a Band-Aid. That's too bad. How long did it last? 11 months, she muttered. My mom jumped in, trying to smooth it over. Chloe's exploring other options. She has so many talents. I nodded. Then I turned to my dad. How's the contracting business, Dad? Still doing the commercial builds? My father's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. A tell I had been cataloging since I was a teenager. Between projects right now, he said, his voice flat. The economy's been tough. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I knew because I had just read the bank called again on his wife's phone. And because the dent in his truck was still there, and because the man who had ordered 2 rounds of expensive lobster and a $500 bottle of wine was sitting across from me performing prosperity the way a community theater actor performs Shakespeare. Loud, committed, and entirely unconvincing to anyone who has seen the real thing. I just nodded and let them keep talking. People will tell you everything when they think you're the bank. They told me about the kitchen renovation they had put on hold, about the vacation they had decided to skip that year, about how things had been a little tight, but nothing they couldn't handle. Each sentence was a window into a house that I could now see was on fire, and they were all standing on the lawn, pretending the smoke was just the neighbor's barbecue. The pressure began to build, not with a direct question, but with a shifting current of expectation. Little comments that pushed in the same direction, casual enough to deny, coordinated enough to corner. Aunt Carol sighed and said, "It must be so rewarding doing so well for yourself, Elena. Some of us aren't so lucky." My cousin Tyler, who I hadn't spoken to since my grandmother's funeral, chimed in, "Yeah, Elena, you really landed on your feet. That's awesome." Even Uncle Steve, who normally communicated exclusively through sports metaphors, managed a, "You hit a home run there, kid." Each compliment was another brick. Each brick was pointed in the same direction. You have money. We see it. We're reminding you, in front of all these witnesses. My mother orchestrated from the center of the table like a conductor who had memorized the score. A nod to Carol, a smile at Tyler, a gentle hand on Dad's arm when he seemed about to speak too soon. She was good at this. She'd always been good. I used to think my mother was just a warm person who loved to host. Now I understood she was a project manager with a 20-year track record, and her biggest deliverable was sitting at the end of the table, sipping sparkling water. The dessert menus arrived. Aunt Carol ordered a crème brûlée without looking at the price. Chloe asked for a chocolate souffle, which required a 20-minute prep time, meaning she'd ordered it before I had even sat down. Of course she had. They were running up the tab the way you run up a tab when you know someone else is paying. No ceiling, no guilt, no glance at the right side of the menu. My sparkling water was down to the ice. Chloe was the one who finally cracked the surface. She'd had 3 glasses of that Cabernet by then, enough to sand down whatever filter she normally kept between her brain and her mouth, which was never especially thick anyway. She leaned across the table, glass in hand, and gave me a grin like we were sharing a joke. "Relax, big sister. It's just dinner. You can afford it." I set my water down. "Afford what?" "This," she gestured at the table, the platters, the wine, the 19-place settings, the crème brûlée and chocolate souffle, currently being prepared by a kitchen that had no idea it was catering a shakedown. "We ordered the good stuff since you're treating." She said it so casually. "Since you're treating," like it had been settled in a meeting I wasn't invited to. Which, of course, it had been. The table went quiet for about 3 seconds, which doesn't sound long until you're the one sitting in it. My mother shot Chloe a look that said, "Too early," and Chloe shrugged like she just bumped a vase she didn't plan to pick up. Uncle Steve studied his lobster. Aunt Carol suddenly found her napkin fascinating. My father cleared his throat. The silence lasted long enough for Ethan to arrive with a fresh bottle of sparkling water and place it beside my glass, and for me to realize 2 things. First, that Ethan was the only person at this table who had poured me something without expecting anything in return. And second, that Chloe had just confirmed out loud what every single person in this room already knew. I was the mark. This whole dinner was a heist, and every lobster tail was evidence. What happened next was an accident, and I almost felt bad for my cousin Megan when it landed. She was trying to make conversation, genuinely I think, because Megan was the one family member who'd sent me a birthday text during year 2 of the silence. A short thinking of you that I'd never replied to and still felt guilty about. "So, Elena, Mom said you got a big promotion, something about running a bunch of restaurants now." I kept it simple. "Regional Operations Director." 4 locations. Megan nodded, impressed. "That's amazing. Like, you're in charge of all of them?" "Staffing, vendors, compliance, financials, everything from the loading dock to the check." I said it the way I'd say it in a meeting. Factual, no polish. But the word financials landed on that table like a rock through a window. Aunt Carol's fork stopped. Uncle Steve looked up from his plate for the first time in 10 minutes. Chloe's scrolling thumb froze. Even Dad shifted in his chair, recalibrating, recalculating. They knew I was successful. They'd built their entire evening around the assumption that I was successful enough to pay. But hearing it, the scope, the authority, the specificity of what I actually did, was different from just assuming it. They'd pictured me as a well-paid waitress who'd gotten lucky. They hadn't pictured someone who could read a profit and loss statement faster than they could read a menu. Someone who managed vendor contracts worth more than their house. Someone who knew exactly, down to the cent, what 19 lobster tails and 2 bottles of Screaming Eagle Cabernet cost before the check ever arrived. The table recalibrated. I could feel it happening, like a change in barometric pressure. The power hadn't shifted yet, but it had loosened. My father waited until dessert. He was strategic about it. I'll give him that. The souffle had arrived. The creme brulee was cracked, and the second bottle of Cabernet was upside down in the ice bucket. The table was warm and full and slow with sugar and wine, and every face was soft with the particular satisfaction that comes from a meal you didn't pay for and don't intend to. My father set down his fork. He folded his hands on the edge of the table, a gesture I'd seen him make before signing contracts, before delivering speeches at Thanksgiving, before telling me at 23 that he needed a cosigner. Just this once, he looked at me, not unkindly, not cruelly, with the particular expression of a man who believes he's being reasonable. "Elena," he smiled, "you're paying, right? You owe us that much. 5 words, you owe us that much." 19 people heard them. Ethan, refilling Aunt Carol's coffee behind me, heard them. The couple at the next table, pretending not to listen, heard them. My mother nodded. My sister smirked. My aunt reached for another pat of butter like the matter was settled. "You owe us 3 years of silence." And not one person at that table had said they were sorry, or that they had been wrong, or that they'd missed me for any reason other than my credit limit. "You owe us that much." I looked at my father across a table covered in the wreckage of a meal I hadn't ordered, surrounded by a family I hadn't been told was coming, holding a glass of water I'd poured myself, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because the decision I'd been afraid to make had just been made for me. I didn't answer right away. I've learned that silence does more work than words in a room full of people who are used to being agreed with. 3 seconds. 5. The kind of silence that makes a table of 19 people shift in their chairs and reach for their water glasses and suddenly remember they have something interesting to look at on the wall behind you. For 15 years, I'd paid so no one would make a scene. I'd picked up every check, co-signed every loan, covered every deposit and every dental bill and every florist invoice, because the cost of saying no was a room exactly like this one, full of staring, expecting faces, full of the unspoken understanding that Elena's love was measured in dollars, and Elena's silence was purchased with compliance. 15 years, thousands of dollars, and the price of admission to my own family had just been announced to the room at roughly $100 a plate, plus wine, plus lobster, plus the particular tax that comes with being the child they only call when something needs funding. I looked at my father's hands, still folded, still steady. I looked at my mother's eyes, still warm, still performing. I looked at Chloe, who was already scrolling again because, as far as she was concerned, this was decided. I looked at Ethan, standing by the service station, watching with the careful attention of a young man who knows something important is happening at his table, but isn't sure what. Then I looked at my sparkling water, half full, catching the candlelight like a small, quiet promise I'd made to myself. I put my napkin on the table. I smiled. "Let me go take care of things," I said, and stood up. My mother exhaled. Aunt Carol patted her chest. My father unfolded his hands. Every single one of them thought I was going to pay. Here's the thing. 15 years behind a host stand teaches you. The person who controls the check controls the room. My family thought they controlled it. They'd set the table, chosen the restaurant, ordered the menu, assembled the audience, and delivered the demand. They had 19 people, 2 bottles of wine, and 3 years of built-up pressure on their side. I had 2 sentences and a waiter named Ethan. If a quiet boundary has ever changed your whole life, if you've ever walked into a room where everyone expected you to fold and you didn't, hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this one lands. I didn't walk toward the front register. I walked toward the service station at the back of the dining room where Ethan was organizing check presenters and a floor manager named David was reviewing a ticket. David wore the standard uniform, black shirt, black tie, earpiece, and he had the look of a man who'd been in the industry long enough to handle whatever walked up to him. I walked up to him. "Excuse me, David," he turned, professional smile. "How can I help?" I kept my voice low. Not dramatic, not conspiratorial, just the volume you use in the industry when you're handling something that doesn't need the dining room's attention. Ethan was beside him, listening, eyes alert. Tray balanced on his hip. Both of them looked at me the way restaurant professionals look at someone who speaks their language, with immediate, precise attention. I said 2 sentences. "I'm not the host, and I won't be covering this table tonight. Please bring the full check to the gentleman at the head of the table, the one whose card is already on file for the reservation." David blinked once. He glanced at Ethan, then back at me. And the second thing, split off just my sparkling water onto a separate check and add 30% to mine for your team. "You've earned it tonight." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. David looked at me for 3 full seconds, reading the situation the way a good floor manager reads every situation. Fast, thorough, without judgment. Then he nodded. Done. That was it. No argument, no hesitation, no "are you sure, ma'am?" Because David had been doing this long enough to know what a redirect looked like, and Ethan had been watching that table long enough to understand why one was needed. I paid my check on the spot. 1 sparkling water, 2 refills, plus a 30% tip. That would be the largest Ethan had received in a month. David ran my card, handed me the receipt, and said quietly, "I'll present the table's check in about 10 minutes once the dessert course clears." Perfect. I walked back to the table, sat down, picked up my water, and took a slow sip. Chloe was arguing with Cousin Tyler about a reality show. Aunt Carol was telling Uncle Steve about her neighbor's fence dispute. My mother was watching me with the careful attention of someone who thinks the check has been handled. My father was leaning back, arms crossed, satisfied. 19 people eating dessert, drinking the last of a $500 bottle of wine, waiting for a bill they had no intention of seeing. I set my glass down and waited with them. Those 10 minutes were the most peaceful of my evening. The table didn't know it yet, but the meal was over in every way that mattered. The food was eaten, the wine was gone, the ask had been made, and the answer had already been delivered in a language none of them spoke. I sat at my end and listened to my family talk. Aunt Carol complained about the cost of mulch. Uncle Steve told a fishing story that had no ending. Chloe took a selfie with the souffle remnants. My mother laughed at something my cousin Megan said, a real laugh. The kind that crinkled her eyes and made her sound for exactly 3 seconds, like the woman who used to hum in the kitchen while making biscuits. I almost felt something. Almost. But then, I looked at my father, who was checking his phone under the table with the tight-jawed focus of a man waiting for a text he didn't want to receive. And I remembered the message I'd read on Chloe's phone. "Elena can cover us through the spring. She's got more than enough." My sparkling water caught the candle light again. I watched the bubbles rise and pop one by one, each one a tiny implosion that nobody noticed. I thought about 17-year-old Elena in her apron, carrying 4 plates up her forearm, learning to smile through the burning in her shoulders. That girl would have paid. That girl would have pulled out her card and covered the whole table and called it love, and gone home and cried in the shower and never told anyone. I wasn't that girl anymore. Ethan appeared at the edge of the alcove, and I knew before he took his first step exactly whose chair he was walking toward. Ethan placed the check presenter, leather-bound, embossed with the Vanguard's logo, directly in front of my father. Not in the center of the table. Not near me. In front of Robert Mayfield, the man who'd made the reservation, whose card was on file, who'd told the table to put it all on this 2 hours ago. The table conversation died like a candle in a draft. My father stared at the leather folio for 2 seconds. I could see him processing. The check was supposed to go to Elena. The check was supposed to go to Elena. The check is in front of me. My mother's eyes went wide. She looked at me, then at the check, then at me again, and for the first time all night, her composure cracked enough to show the math running behind it. "Elena," she started. My father recovered first. He was good at recovering. He'd spent 63 years never admitting he was caught off guard. He picked up the check presenter, opened it with a casual flick, and did not look at the total. He couldn't look at the total. If he looked at the total in front of 19 people, the performance would end. "I've got it," he said, pulling his credit card from his wallet with the same two-finger flourish he'd used earlier. He handed the card to Ethan without breaking eye contact with me. "We're celebrating, remember?" Ethan took the card. "I'll be right back, sir," he said it gently, the way you say things when you know what's about to happen and the person you're talking to doesn't. My father leaned back, crossed his arms, smiled at me with the full confidence of a man who believed his card would save him. Ethan came back in 4 minutes. He stood beside my father's chair. He leaned down and said at a volume designed to be discreet, but heard by a table that had gone silent enough to hear ice melt. "I'm sorry, sir, the card has been declined." Nobody moved. My father's smile held for 1 more second. A reflex, like a light that stays on after you flip the switch. Then it went out. "Run it again," he said. Ethan nodded. He disappeared. He came back in 2 minutes. Same lean, same gentle voice. "I'm sorry, sir, it's still not going through. Would you like to try another card?" My father reached for his wallet. His fingers moved through the slots. 1 card, then another, then a third he pulled from behind his driver's license like a last bullet in a chamber he'd forgotten he loaded. He handed it to Ethan. The table was silent. 19 people, no forks moving, no wine being poured, no laughter, just the sound of Robert Mayfield's 63 years of pride compressing into a wallet he couldn't close fast enough. Ethan came back a 3rd time. He didn't need to speak. His face said it. My father looked at Ethan. Then he looked at me. Not with anger. Not yet, with the raw, unguarded expression of a man who has just realized in front of every person who matters to him that the net he'd been counting on was gone, and the ground was exactly as hard as he'd always feared. He looked at me the way you look at a lifeboat that's pulling away from the ship. I picked up my sparkling water, took a sip, set it down. "I don't owe you. I never did." My father's chair scraped back against the hardwood with a sound like tearing paper. "Elena," his voice was low, controlled, shaking at the edges. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Dad. Your card was declined. That's between you and your bank. You were supposed to." He stopped himself, but not fast enough. The sentence hung in the air, unfinished, visible to everyone. "You were supposed to pay." My mother started crying. Not the quiet kind, the performative kind. The kind with gasps and dabbing and enough volume to recruit sympathy from adjacent tables. "After everything we've done for you, after I carried you, how could you sit there and, what did you do for me, Mom?" My voice was level. I didn't raise it, I didn't lean forward. I stayed in my chair with my hands around my water glass. "Tell me in front of everyone. What did you do for me in the last 3 years?" Chloe slammed her hand on the table. "This is so typical. You always have to make everything about you." Aunt Carol reached for my arm. "Elena, dear, your father is clearly embarrassed. Can't you just know, 1 word?" I said it the way I'd say it to a vendor who tried to short my invoice. Clear, final, and without apology. Then, my father broke. Not with anger this time, with something worse. His voice dropped. And for 1 moment, 1 terrible, honest moment, he sounded like a man standing in a house with the lights turned off. "Elena, please, we're drowning." I saw him. I saw the scared man behind the performance, the father who'd lost his business and his pride and couldn't say it out loud until his credit card said it for him. I saw him, and I ached. then he added, "And you'd let us." And the ache stopped. Because even drowning, he was still reaching for my wallet instead of my hand. I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic. The way you stand when you've made your decision and you don't need the room's permission to leave. "Dad, I'm sorry you're struggling. I mean that. But this," I gestured at the table, the empty platters, the upside-down wine bottles, the 19 faces watching me like I was the villain in a story they'd rehearsed all week. "This isn't asking for help. This is a trap. You didn't invite me to make amends. You invited me to make a payment." My mother's crying shifted into something harder. "That's not fair, Elena. We just wanted you back." "You wanted me back for what I could cover, Mom." I read the messages. "She can cover us through the spring." The table went white. Chloe's face strained. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father looked at the tablecloth. "If you need help, real help, I will sit down with you and a financial counselor, and we will figure out a plan. No tricks, no audience, no lobster." "But I'm not paying this bill." "I didn't order it. I wasn't told about it, and I don't owe it to you." "I don't owe you." I never did. Nobody spoke. I picked up my purse. I looked at my mother and I said the last thing I would say to her at that table. "You always told me family takes care of family. So why was I the only one who ever did?" Then I walked toward the door, past the busboy, past the hostess, past the heavy mahogany doors with the brass handles. Ethan caught me near the coat check. "Ma'am," he said, holding my receipt. "Thank you," he said, quiet and sincere. I touched his shoulder. "You're doing great," I told him again. Then I walked out. The parking lot was quiet. Thursday evening, warm air, cicadas starting up in the landscape trees that made the Vanguard look like it belonged somewhere more important than a strip mall. I sat in my car with the engine off and the window down and read the sticky notes still pressed to my steering wheel. One dinner, then home. One dinner. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the family group chat. The messages were already flooding in. My mother, Aunt Carol, Chloe, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all of them typing at once, a cascade of exclamation points and accusations and the particular kind of fury that only comes from people who've been caught. I didn't read them. I scrolled to the bottom, tapped Leave Group, and watched the notification confirm it. Elena has left the chat. I set the phone on the passenger seat. I started the engine, and I drove home in the same silence I'd driven there. Except this time, the silence wasn't nervous. It was mine. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No one called that night or the next day or the day after that. The group chat I'd left continued without me. I know because cousin Megan, the one who'd sent the birthday text, reached out separately a week later. "I just wanted you to know," she wrote. "That was the most honest thing anyone's done at a family dinner in 20 years. I'm sorry I was part of it." Megan was the only one who apologized. 3 weeks later, Chloe texted, not to apologize, but to ask if I could lend her first and last month's rent for a new apartment. I replied with the name of a financial counseling service and wished her well. She didn't respond. Through Megan, I learned the rest in pieces over the following months. My father's contracting business had folded 18 months before the dinner. Bad bets on 2 commercial projects that went sideways. My mother had been covering minimums on 4 credit cards with a home equity line that was now maxed out. The house went on the market in July. They moved to a smaller rental in a town 30 minutes south. Chloe took a job at a dentist's office answering phones. None of it was what I wanted for them. All of it was the consequence of choices they'd made long before I walked into the Vanguard. And none of it was mine to fix. I did what I'd promised at the table. I called my father 6 weeks later and offered to sit with him and a financial counselor. He hung up. I haven't called again, but the offer still stands. I learned that the most expensive thing you can buy is other people's comfort with your silence. And the night I stopped paying for it was the night I finally got rich. That's my story. 19 seats, 1 glass of water, and a credit card that told the truth. Nobody else would. If you've ever been the family bank, hear me. Helping is a choice, not a debt, and a boundary doesn't have to be loud to be unbreakable. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.